En ese sentido, los esfuerzos de la Fuerza Internacional de Asistencia para la Seguridad y la misión de entrenamiento de Afganistán de la OTAN son una contribución importante para la creación de condiciones que permitan a las autoridades nacionales asumir gradualmente las responsabilidades de seguridad y gobernabilidad. Respaldamos, como lo señaló el representante Staffan de Mistura, continuar incrementando las relaciones con las autoridades locales y líderes comunitarios que permitan establecer procesos de diálogo inclusivos para facilitar la reconciliación con todos los segmentos de la población. La aprobación de la resolución 1988, en la que el Consejo de Seguridad estableció un régimen de sanciones independiente para los individuos y entidades asociados a los talibán y le reconoce un papel central al gobierno con respecto a las solicitudes de supresión de la lista, es una decisión que sin duda contribuirá en el proceso de reconciliación y la construcción de confianza entre las partes. Afganistán enfrenta numerosos problemas que pueden amenazar la sostenibilidad de los avances logrados. La violencia sigue siendo uno de los principales factores que afectan su progreso y ha resultado en el aumento de necesidades humanitarias, así como en el número de civiles muertos y desplazados internos. Reiteramos nuestro llamado a todas las partes en el conflicto a cumplir con sus obligaciones en el marco del derecho internacional humanitario y los derechos humanos y a tomar todas las medidas necesarias para asegurar la protección de civiles. Resaltamos la relevancia de las iniciativas regionales conjuntas emprendidas para combatir los diversos eslabones del problema mundial de las drogas que afectan a Afganistán y a la región. La participación constructiva y constante de diversos actores regionales y extrarregionales interesados en la aplicación de estrategias comunes para combatir el problema mundial de las drogas en todos sus aspectos en el marco del principio de responsabilidad compartida y de manera equilibrada contribuye con la estabilización y promoción de la confianza mutua entre los países vecinos y más allá de la región. Mi país, Colombia, reitera su disposición a afianzar la cooperación bilateral con Afganistán para enfrentar esta y otras manifestaciones de la delincuencia organizada. La seguridad es una condición esencial para la consolidación del Estado de Derecho, el ejercicio de las libertades fundamentales y el establecimiento de las bases para el desarrollo económico. En este sentido, la consolidación del marco estratégico integrado para lograr una mayor coherencia en los esfuerzos de la organización y en la ejecución de los programas de apoyo al proceso de Kabul es un paso positivo para asegurar la unidad de acción de Naciones Unidas y de la comunidad internacional para contribuir con el ejercicio de la soberanía afgana en todos los aspectos del futuro de su pueblo. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Colombia. I now give the floor to the representative of Portugal.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. I would like to thank the Special Representative for his very comprehensive briefing, as usual, and also Ambassador Lin for his very useful intervention. I must begin my address, Mr. President, by recalling the attacks in Mazar-e-Sharif. UNAMA, and indeed the entire international effort and support for the government of Afghanistan and its people, were brutally attacked in Mazar-e-Sharif last April. I hereby convey to you, Mr. Special Representative, Portugal's highest appreciation for the courage shown in the face of adversity and for the constant commitment that UNAMA's personnel show to their mission, and we commend their dedication. This is the guarantee that the losses suffered will not have been in vain. The Secretary General's report, the Special Representative's briefing, and Ambassador Nin's address have, I believe, covered the essential aspects of the situation in Afghanistan and shown us what it takes to make the transition a success. Last spring was a hard time indeed. The security assessment indicates that insecurity persists and that the rising number of casualties, especially civilian ones, is a clear sign that the battle for the future of Afghanistan continues. The recent attack on the intercontinental attack, I believe, underlines this situation in a very symbolic way. But this is a battle that must be won not only on the ground against the enemy, but also in terms of public opinion, the Afghan public opinion first and foremost, but also the international one. Civilian casualties are evidently the cruelest phase of war. Limitation of civilians' casualties must therefore rank at the highest level in the military command's priorities as a fundamental element in the war in Afghanistan as in any other war. We are aware that the significant efforts have been and are being made to decrease civilian casualties caused by military operations, and we call upon military commanders to pursue these efforts with steadfast commitment. It is clear, nevertheless, that it is the insurgents that are responsible for the vast majority of civilian casualties and for the growing numbers of innocent victims. I recall the Special Representative mentioning last March the offer made to insurgents to bring forward their own numbers of civilian casualties, which went unheeded. I also recall the multiple steps already being taken to try to address damage to civilians caused by national and international forces. It would be of extremely useful to build upon what is already on the ground and integrate the valuable advice, expertise, and goodwill we are able to congregate in order to adequately compensate civilians for their justified grievances. Mr. President, the Special Representative reports that the draft regulation on the Women's Protection Centres is now under appreciation by the Council of Ministers Technical Legislative Review Committee. Portugal is encouraged by the fact that this process has been allowed to proceed with the required inclusiveness so that the amendments which fully protect women's human rights were incorporated in the final version of the law. We are also pleased to see that UNAMA continues to raise awareness and to monitor the implementation of the law on the elimination of violence against women. We commend UNAMA's continued efforts in terms of the protection and promotion of human rights, as well as the role played by UN Women. Portugal reiterates the importance it attaches to the participation of women in Afghan government institutions, including the civil service. Concerning the protection of children, which was mentioned by the Special Representative, I would also like to highly commend the initiative of UNAMA and UNICEF in partnership with the Office of the Special Representative on Violence Against Children. The broad range of partners assembled by the UN's agency and the Special Representative is an encouraging sign of public commitment to the rights of children. Finally, Mr. President, we take note of the multiple efforts being made by the Afghan government, both internally and externally. Abroad, recent regional steps towards increased cooperation, both at the bilateral and multilateral levels, are to be welcomed as Afghanistan reassumes its role as a fundamental crossroads of Asia. This shows how Afghanistan's neighbors can and should play a crucial role in the process of stabilization of that country and indeed of the region, as underlined by Mr. de Mistura and Ambassador Tanin. In the home front, significant challenges remain. We entirely second the affirmation in the report that, and I quote, "It is vital that the transition be managed so as to lead to an improvement in security as well as better access to essential services for the population." Transition is not only security, as Stefan and Mistura underlined. Military success on the ground must translate into an effective governance framework, into strengthening rule of law, institutions, and public services, in order to protect those gains from erosion caused by lack of accountability and disconnection from the population's needs. In this regard, the inauguration of the Joint Independent Anti-Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Committee can only be applauded and its work strongly encouraged. Recent developments at the institutional level, namely in the Parliament, have highlighted the need for renewed capacity for political compromise and an adherence to the Constitution. The historical moment Afghanistan is living requires undivided focus and commitment. I am sure that decision makers in Afghanistan are working hard so that this phase remains contained within the bounds of a growing constitutional democracy. Mr. President, I conclude. The transition is set to begin this month, and this is something to commemorate. Vast amounts of resources and political will are concurring to make July 2011 a point of departure rather than a point of arrival for Afghanistan and its people. It is up to us to continue to support, as allies and friends, the government of Afghanistan and its people so as to achieve the success they deserve. Ich danke Ihnen.
Thank the representative of Portugal, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me begin by congratulating you on assuming the presidency of the Council and thanking the Ambassador of Gabon for his very able leadership last month. Special Representative de Mistura, Ambassador Tanin, thank you both. Special Representative de Mistura, I want to thank you for your briefing this morning and for your continued exceptional service in Afghanistan. Please also convey to UNAMA staff the deep and abiding gratitude of the United States for the critical work they do in the face of considerable hardship. Mr. President, that hardship was again made tragically clear on April 1st when a mob attacked the UNAMA compound in Mazar-e Sharif, resulting in the deaths of 7 UN staff members. We reiterate to their families and loved ones our deepest condolences. As always, we stand with the United Nations in the face of such a brutal assault. And again, we urge fellow member states to provide the United Nations with the resources it needs to reinforce its facilities and protect its staff. Mr. President, let me briefly highlight 3 top priorities for my government in Afghanistan. First, as President Obama recently said, July marks the beginning of a responsible transition that will see Afghan forces gradually taking the lead in securing their own country. By 2014, this process of transition will be complete, and the Afghan people will be responsible for their own security. As Afghan security forces move into the lead, the United States will continue to reduce its military footprint, and our mission will change from combat to support. As President Obama announced last month, the United States will withdraw 10,000 U.S. troops from Afghanistan by the end of this year. The remaining 23,000 surge troops he announced in December 2009 will leave Afghanistan by the end of summer 2012. President Obama made this decision from a position of strength. We have made significant progress towards our goals. The U.S. military surge, together with additional troops committed by our allies and partners, has helped stabilize more of the country and shifted the momentum away from the insurgency. Afghan security forces have improved in quality and grown by more than 100,000 troops. In some areas, these improvements have already allowed for the transition of responsibility for security to the Afghan National Security Forces. In the face of violence, terror, and intimidation, as Ambassador Tanin noted, Afghans are defending their country, establishing local police forces, reopening markets and schools, and creating new opportunities for women and girls. We will continue to support them as they reclaim their country after decades of strife, long after our military mission has ended. Second, even as we pursue this transition to Afghan security responsibility, we are redoubling our efforts to pursue a peaceful end to this conflict. We support Afghan-led initiatives to reconcile the Afghan people, including the Taliban. We have taken tangible steps to advance Afghan reconciliation and reintegration initiatives, including support to the Afghan High Peace Council and provincial police and reintegration councils. As Secretary of State Clinton said in February, and as President Obama reiterated in June, the necessary outcomes of any negotiation would have to include a commitment by reconciling insurgents to renounce violence, abandon any alliance with al-Qaeda, and abide by the Afghan Constitution, including its protections for women. As evidence of our seriousness, we champion the Council's decision to split the 1267 sanctions regime and establish distinct sanctions for al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Resolution 1988 is an important tool for promoting reconciliation while isolating extremists, and it sends a clear message to the Taliban. There is a future for those willing to rejoin the fold of peaceful Afghan society. Finally, Mr. President, let me touch briefly on an important part of Afghanistan's democratic development, its electoral system. Last year's parliamentary elections, the first run by Afghans since the fall of the Taliban in 2001, represented a historic step for the Afghan people. Afghan electoral institutions, the Independent Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Complaints Commission demonstrated professionalism throughout the process. They performed admirably, despite a difficult security environment and allegations of fraud. We are consulting closely with Afghan officials and our international partners, including UNAMA, on the recent announcement by the Special Elections Tribunal, which called for the electoral results of 62 seats in the Walesa Jirga to be overturned. We urge Afghanistan's political leaders and all Afghan institutions to act within their clearly defined areas of competence in accordance with the Afghan Constitution and electoral law, preserving the necessary system of checks and balances between the judicial, executive, and legislative branches. The United States has been clear and consistent about the need for Afghanistan to detect and deal with fraud related to the election process in accordance with the Afghan Constitution and democratic principles as provided for by the mechanisms of the Independent Electoral Commission. It is important that Afghanistan's parliament fulfill its constitutional role on behalf of the Afghan people. Meanwhile, we must continue to strengthen the capacity of Afghanistan's electoral institutions. Long-term electoral reform remains key to the country's democratic future. As we look to the 2014 presidential elections and beyond, we must ensure that we learn the lessons of the last several years for the benefit of Afghanistan's democratic future. Mr. President, 2011 is a pivotal year, which will be capped by an international gathering in Bonn in December, marking 10 years since the international community joined with the Afghan people to help chart a new path together. The last decade has seen great hardship and sacrifice, but it has also produced real progress. With common purpose and sustained commitment, we will continue to help the Afghan people build a more peaceful and prosperous future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。我感谢秘书长特别代表德米斯图拉先生的通报和阿富汗常驻代表塔宁大使的发言。主席先生，1年前，阿富汗问题喀布尔国际会议成功举行。1年来，经过阿富汗政府和人民的努力，在国际社会的帮助下，阿富汗和平重建取得了积极进展。同时，阿富汗正处于承上启下的关键时刻，实现安全、政治、经济、社会等领域的全面平衡发展，需要继续做出努力。在此，我愿强调以下5点：第一，中方支持阿富汗在国际社会帮助下继续推进喀布尔进程，实现阿富汗的和平、稳定和发展，需要充分尊重阿富汗的独立、主权和领土完整，发挥阿富汗政府和人民的自主性和主导权，真正实现阿人治阿。第二，中方对近期阿富汗安全形势恶化、平民伤亡增加表示严重关切。我们注意到有关国家宣布了自阿富汗撤军的计划。 我们希望有关方面在向阿富汗移交安全权利的过程中，切实承担起责任，帮助阿富汗加强安全能力建设，确保实现和平稳定过渡。第三，中方支持阿富汗的民族和解努力，充分尊重阿富汗政府和人民的自主选择，希望阿富汗和平与再融合计划取得进展。第四，阿富汗的和平重建需要国际社会给予持续关注和支持。国际社会应切实兑现和履行援助阿富汗的承诺，继续向阿富汗政府和人民提供帮助。各方对阿富汗的援助应尊重阿富汗自己确定的优先领域，密切结合阿富汗国家发展战略加以落实。第五，中方赞赏联合国在推进阿富汗和平重建进程中做出的积极努力，支持联阿援助团继续为国际社会帮助阿富汗和平重建发挥中心协调作用，并希望联阿援助团与阿富汗政府加强沟通、协调与合作。主席先生，中国和阿富汗是友好邻邦，中方一贯致力于发展中阿睦邻友好，重视并积极参与阿富汗重建进程。中方将继续向阿富汗提供力所能及的帮助，同国际社会一道，共同为阿富汗早日实现和平稳定和发展做出贡献。谢谢主席先生。
Thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month, and also to congratulate Ambassador Masson and the Gabonese delegation on his stewardship of the Council during the month of June. I wish to thank the Secretary General for his report and Special Representative Staffan de Mistura for his informative briefing this morning, and also Ambassador Tanin for his statement. As other speakers have done, I extend the United Kingdom's condolences over the shocking deaths of UNAMA staff in Mazar Sharif in April. It is vital that dedicated UN staff can carry out their work in a safe and secure environment with the full support of the Afghan government and the international community. I would also like to pay tribute to all other international personnel for the sacrifices they have made in this campaign. Mr. President, the British Prime Minister David Cameron has just returned from a visit to Afghanistan, where he saw at first hand the progress that the Afghan government and the international community have made in preparing for the transition to Afghan-led security responsibility across the country. It is encouraging that the first areas are on track to begin the transition process on 20 July. The Afghan National Security Forces will continue to grow in size and capability as they prepare to take the security lead in all provinces by the end of 2014. The United Nations surge has helped prepare for transition, and as Ambassador Rice has confirmed, will be drawn down as originally planned. Other international forces will also begin to withdraw as conditions allow. My Prime Minister announced earlier today that UK force levels will reduce by a further 500 from 9,500 to 9,000 by the end of 2012. These are signs of progress, improved security and the growing strength of the Afghan forces. But it does not signal the end of international support for Afghanistan. Mr. President, The United Kingdom deeply regrets all civilian casualties that result from the actions of international and Afghan government forces. When such casualties occur, it is despite the strong preventative measures that have been put in place. As the Secretary-General notes in his report, the vast majority of casualties are caused by the insurgents, who deliberately use violent tactics designed to intimidate the population. In the last quarter, the insurgency has continued to assassinate government employees and deliberately attacked civilian targets, including hospitals, markets, and the Intercontinental Hotel. Insurgent-related civilian casualties outnumber Afghan and international forces casualties by a ratio of some 8 to 1. We condemn such attacks in the strongest possible terms. Mr. President, an Afghan-led political process is needed to underpin the military progress. To be durable, any political settlement must be inclusive and must respect the interests and rights of all Afghan citizens. The death of Osama bin Laden gives the Taliban an opportunity to make a decisive break with al-Qaeda. The British Foreign Secretary has called for the Taliban to make that break and participate in a political process. We urge the international community to call for the same outcome. Mr. President, fundamental to any political settlement and crucial to the future stability of Afghanistan is the safeguarding of democratic principles, including free and credible elections. The United Kingdom remains fully committed to working with the Afghan government, parliament, and people to strengthen Afghan democracy and representative institutions. We are therefore deeply concerned that the dispute between the Special Court and Parliament remains unresolved. We call upon all parties involved to work together to find a solution in line with Afghan law and to respect the separation of powers that is guaranteed by the Constitution. The current situation illustrates the need for further progress on electoral reform. We continue to support the UN's role in assisting the Afghan government, institutions and people as they take forward commitments made in the London and Kabul conferences last year. This continues to form a vital part of UNAMA's mandate. Mr. President, irreversible transition and progress on the political track must be supported by governance and development progress. Putting in place the necessary measures to allow an IMF program will be crucial if we are to make progress on these issues. Following the incident of the Kabul Bank, we call for a rapid resolution to negotiations on a new IMF program, and for those who have broken the law to be brought to justice. The Afghan people deserve no less. Mr. President, since the Secretary-General issued his quarterly report, important progress has been made preparing for the Afghan-led Bonn Conference. Members of the International Contact Group had a constructive dialogue in Kabul. We now need to focus on translating these discussions into tangible outcomes, particularly on regional cooperation. And we welcome the work led by Turkey in this area and look forward to the Istanbul Conference in November. Finally, Mr. President, despite the challenges, significant progress has been made on the road to a secure and viable Afghanistan. As Afghanistan moves from a post-conflict country to one with more traditional development needs, UNAMA and the wider UN family will play an increasingly important role. We therefore welcome the forthcoming review of the UN's activities. We hope that the Secretary-General will include an assessment of UNAMA's delivery against its current mandate, its role in the post-transition landscape, and how the UN can support the Afghan government bring about the emergence of a strong, durable, and self-sustainable Afghan state. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je tiens aussi à vous exprimer mes félicitations au moment où vous assumez votre présidence, notre présidence du Conseil pour ce mois de juillet. Je saisis cette occasion pour remercier tous tous les ambassadeurs, représentants et leurs délégations de la collaboration et du soutien qu'ils m'ont accordé lors de la présidence par le Gabon du Conseil au mois de juin. Je tiens à remercier le représentant spécial Stéphane de Mistura et l'ambassadeur Tanin des exposés qu'ils viennent de nous faire sur la situation en Afghanistan, sur la base du rapport du secrétaire général soumis à notre examen. Je tiens avant tout à exprimer notre ferme condamnation des actes de violence récents, car ils minent la dynamique de progrès et des avancées observées depuis le mois de mars dernier. En effet, depuis notre dernier débat, le 17 mars, la situation en Afghanistan a été marquée par d'importantes avancées, notamment dans le cadre du processus de transition politique. Et nous notons avec satisfaction les progrès enregistrés dans le domaine de la réconciliation nationale. Et à cet effet, nous nous félicitons de ce que le gouvernement afghan ait, à la demande du Conseil de sécurité, pris l'engagement de faciliter la réintégration des insurgés modérés en application de la résolution 1988. Nous saluons également la mise en place par le gouvernement d'un comité conjoint autonome chargé de promouvoir la transparence et la responsabilisation dans les administrations. Nous pensons là que c'est un élément important du transfert des responsabilités dont nous parlait l'ambassadeur Tanin tantôt. Malgré ces efforts, de nombreux obstacles subsistent, notamment dans les domaines sécuritaires et de la bonne gouvernance. La délégation saisit cette occasion pour inviter à nouveau le gouvernement afghan à tout mettre en œuvre pour accroître ses moyens de lutte contre le terrorisme, la corruption, qui demeurent des obstacles majeurs à la paix et à la stabilité dans le pays. Monsieur le Président, comme nous l'avons souligné lors du dernier débat, la sécurité et la protection des civils doivent figurer parmi les priorités du gouvernement dans ses efforts de construction d'un État souverain reposant sur des institutions constitutionnelles solides et stables. Les autorités afghanes doivent prendre la mesure de leurs responsabilités dans ce domaine. Les départs annoncés d'une grande partie des troupes de certaines forces internationales au cours de ce mois, particulièrement celles des États-Unis et de l'OTAN, viennent confirmer l'immense défi que le gouvernement se doit de relever dans son aspiration à assumer la plénitude de ses prérogatives régaliennes. C'est le lieu ici, Monsieur le Président, de renouveler notre ferme appui au personnel de la MANUA et des Nations Unies pour l'assistance qu'ils apportent au gouvernement afghan à cette fin. Pour conclure, nous nous associons à l'hommage rendu à M. Stéphane de Mistura pour ses efforts constants en faveur de la paix et de la stabilité dans ce pays. Nous partageons le point de vue sur la transition qui va s'amorcer, exprimé par M. de Mistura, que la sécurité reste prioritaire, mais l'amélioration de la sécurité doit déboucher sur une dividende de la transition reposant sur la cohérence de l'aide internationale, mais aussi sur un dialogue inclusif et participatif. Pour terminer, nous renouvelons notre appui au personnel de la MANUA et des Nations Unies en Afghanistan. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
I thank the representative of Gabon for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me to add the voice of my delegation to those of others who have congratulated you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of June, and also to thank Ambassador Nelson Masson for the excellent stewardship of the Security Council during the month of June, and you for during the month of July. Mr. President, we thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan, Mr. Stéphane de Mistura, for introducing the report of the Secretary General on Afghanistan. We also appreciate the participation of the Permanent Representative of Afghanistan, Ambassador Zahir Tanin, at this debate. My delegation welcomes the relative positive developments that have taken place over the last few months in Afghanistan, particularly with regard to the progress towards greater Afghan leadership and ownership. These include progress in the implementation of the Kabul process, momentum on reintegration and reconciliation efforts, as well as cooperation between Afghans and her neighbors. Despite these positive developments, Afghanistan continues to face critical challenges in its endeavor to achieve stability and development. Key among them is the security situation, worsening humanitarian situation, human rights deficiencies, and continuing civilian casualties. South Africa stresses that given the magnitude of these challenges, a comprehensive strategy incorporating security, humanitarian, good governance, and socio-economic development is required. In this regard, we would like to underscore the central role of UNAMA in supporting the government of Afghanistan in coordinating international assistance to the country. Crucially, the continued role played by bilateral partners remains indispensable. We are particularly concerned, Mr. President, at the attacks directed against the UN and its personnel. South Africa condemns in the strongest terms the violent attacks against the United Nations Operations Center in Mazar-e Sharif on 1st of April 2011, which resulted in the death and injury of United Nations staff. Mr. President, South Africa continues to welcome efforts to strengthen political outreach activities. Political dialogue and reconciliation among people and leaders remains critical to long-term stability of Afghanistan. We are pleased that the High Peace Council has intensified its efforts to lead reconciliation efforts. This, together with reintegration efforts of insurgents, including the Taliban, should be encouraged. Mr. President, my delegation remains concerned by the plight of children caught up in conflict in Afghanistan, and in this connection, we strongly condemn the attack on a school last Sunday by a suspected militant on a motorbike who threw a hand grenade at the gates of the school. With regard to the role of women, my delegation is of the view that Afghan women have a significant role to play in the peace and stability of their country. Their role in building a new Afghan society should be welcomed. National ownership and leadership remains crucial to political security and socio-economic progress in Afghanistan. On its part, the international community should continue its supportive role in the country's transition from a conflict to stability and prosperity. South Africa therefore continues to support the presence and role of UNAMA in Afghanistan. In conclusion, we commend Special Representative de Mistura for completing the integrated strategic framework for a comprehensive review of UNAMA's mandated activities and the United Nations support in Afghanistan, and thank UNAMA and its personnel for its efforts in executing the mandate of the Security Council for a more peaceful and stable Afghanistan. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank the Special Representative de Mistura for his very inspiring and lucid briefing. I also want to thank Ambassador Tanin not only for his comprehensive briefing, but for the tremendous courage that he has demonstrated, even in trying times. Nigeria welcomes the steady progress in Afghanistan. The quest for honorable peace and stability has been steadfast. A new constitution is in place. Several elections have been held. Economic growth seems promising. The new counterinsurgency strategy bolsters recent military gains and donor commitment to funding civilian reconstruction remains very strong. We believe that these political developments should be consolidated through a rigorous reconciliation and reintegration process involving the Taliban and non-Taliban insurgents, especially in the Kandahar area. As the report cautions, we must be vigilant in ensuring that the reconciling parties are indeed genuinely committed not only to the new code of conduct delineated by the government, but also upholding the Constitution. The political process must be led and driven by Afghans and in accordance with the Constitution. It must promote not only lasting peace and stability, but also the protection of the interests of women. A successful political process will serve to underpin the ongoing efforts of the government to improve governance and accountability, including the unimpeded participation of women in the peace process. The government should remain committed to its anti-corruption agenda and its obligations from the London and Kabul conferences. A greater commitment by the government to its anti-corruption agenda and its obligation from the London and Kabul conferences will strengthen these efforts. On the security sector, the recent attacks on the UN Operations Center in Mazar-e-Sharif and on the capital's premier hotel are tragic reminders of the tense and fragile security situation in the country. We condemn such cowardly acts that indiscriminately target innocent civilians, security forces, and ISAF personnel. Perpetrators of these attacks must be brought to justice. Indeed, such attacks undermine the capacity of the Afghan security forces and raise questions about the readiness of the Afghan authorities and security forces to meet the security challenges ahead. We support the urgent strengthening of the implementation phase of the security transition process through enhanced training and capacity building and greater cooperation between the UN and ISAF forces. The participation of the Afghan government in the listing and delisting process will provide a more secure platform for the fight against terrorism, especially against the background of the Kabul communique. This is why Nigeria supported the decision to split the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban sanctions regimes. In this regard, we wish to reiterate that such delisting requests should be addressed by the committee on a case-by-case basis and especially on their own merit. In the economic sphere, Nigeria commends the government's continued commitment to implementing the National Priority Program in accordance with the Kabul process. Implementing the program and meeting the government's set benchmarks will require greater coordination and timely international assistance by the donor community. We support the channeling of donor funds and other assistance to the country through the Afghan budget system for greater coherence and greater efficiency. The current socioeconomic growth and the government's prioritized program, including education and health, will suffer reversal if a viable solution is not urgently found to the continued impasse on the IMF program. We therefore support the setting up of an appropriate mechanism which both the government and donors can utilize to advance and implement an IMF program. On regional cooperation, we welcome the growing cooperation between Afghanistan and its neighbors, especially in overcoming counterterrorism challenges, combating drugs, arms, and human trafficking, as well as organized crime. We welcome the revival of the tripartite meeting between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the United States. Both developments reaffirm the commitment of regional partners to Afghanistan's stability, economic development, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. It is our hope that the tripartite initiative will be sustained as we all look forward to the Istanbul conference scheduled for the 2nd of November this year, and the International Conference of Foreign Ministers scheduled to take place in Bonn at the end of this year. Through these conferences, the international community can renew commitment to and support the Afghan-led peace process. Mr. President, the future of Afghanistan and its destiny may defy imagination. But the international community must be eternally vigilant to make certain that it becomes a future of peace, that it is a future of security, that indeed it is a future of genuine reconciliation and development. In this formidable endeavor, we commend the Special Representative, Staffan de Mistura, for his inspiring and exceptional leadership of UNAMA, the distinctive accomplishments of the staff of the mission, and their invaluable contributions to the concerted global effort to restore democracy, peace, and security to Afghanistan will endure eternally. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Nigeria for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, позвольте поздравить вас с заступлением на эту должность в Совете Безопасности в июле, пожелать вам успехов, а также позвольте выразить благодарность нашему габонскому председательству в июне месяце за прекрасно проведенную работу. Мы признательны господину Стефану де Мистуре за обстоятельный и откровенный анализ ситуации в Афганистане и представление очередного доклада Генсекретаря ООН. Мы приветствуем выступление постоянного представителя Афганистана уважаемого господина Танина. Мы высоко ценим усилия, предпринимаемые миссией ООН по стабилизации в Афганистане и выполнению своего мандата. Но мы разделяем прозвучавшие оценки в отношении по-прежнему сохраняющейся в Афганистане тяжелой обстановки в области безопасности. И свидетельством этого является ряд серьезных инцидентов, произошедших в последние несколько месяцев. Речь, конечно, прежде всего идет о трагическом апрельском нападении на представительство ООН в Мазари-Шарифе с жертвами среди сотрудников ООН. Мы выражаем соболезнования семьям погибших. Нас не могут не шокировать убийства в провинции Тахар бывшего заместителя главы Министерства внутренних дел Афганистана Дауда в мае сего года, атаки боевиков на больницу в провинции Лагар и автомашины губернаторов провинций Бадахшан и Парван в июне сего года, а также недавняя вылазка талибов на гостиницу «Интерконтиненталь», в результате которой погибли в основном мирные жители. Мы решительно осуждаем все эти террористические акты. Действия боевиков подтверждают, движение талибов продолжает преследовать цели дестабилизации ситуации в Афганистане, подрыва усилий международного сообщества по постконфликтному обустройству страны и, вопреки заявлениям некоторых своих лидеров, ни в коей мере не считается с нуждами афганского народа, заинтересованного в установлении прочного мира, согласия и процветания независимого демократического Афганистана. Наше особое беспокойство связано с ситуацией на севере страны, где произошел ряд громких вышеупомянутых актов, террористических актов. Именно оттуда террористическая активность перетекает на территорию сопредельных центральноазиатских государств, наших партнеров по СНГ, ОДКБ и Шанхайской организации сотрудничества. В свете продолжающегося усиления террористической активности талибов и аль-каидовцев особую актуальность приобретает призыв проявлять адресный и взвешенный подход при реализации программы национального примирения. Мы рассчитываем, что недавняя модификация санкционного режима, введенного резолюцией Совета Безопасности 1267, будет способствовать активизации усилий правительства Афганистана по реализации стратегии национального примирения. Она придаст дополнительный импульс решению задач афганского урегулирования и укрепления региональной безопасности, которые были согласованы с международным сообществом. В этой связи особо отмечаем подтверждение в резолюции 1988 важнейших принципов национального примирения в Афганистане: отказа от вооруженного сопротивления, признания Конституции страны, а также разрыва связи с Аль-Каидой и другими террористическими организациями. Соответствие данным критериям остается непременным условием вывода фигурантов талибского списка из-под режима санкций. Диалог с талибами может вестись исключительно под афганским руководством. Любые закулисные контакты с ними, тем более за спиной официальных властей, чреваты неверными сигналами об истинных намерениях международного сообщества в контексте афганского регулирования. Нас вызывает обеспокоенность и возможные последствия реализации планов по долгосрочному закреплению военных присутствий в Афганистане после 2014 года. Вместо этого мы предлагаем сообща подумать о восстановлении нейтрального статуса Афганистана. В пользу этой идеи уже высказались президенты России и США в своем совместном заявлении 24 июня 2010 года, а также лидеры стран-членов Шанхайской организации сотрудничества в Астанинской декларации десятилетия этой организации 15 июня. Разумеется, инициатива в данном вопросе за самим афганским народом. Причем речь идет не о ближайшем будущем, а о том времени, когда стабилизационные усилия в Афганистане будут завершены. Но если восстановление нейтралитета будет обозначено в качестве задачи на перспективу уже сейчас, это может облегчить диалог о примирении. Мы крайне удручены положением дел с незаконным производством и торговлей наркотиками в Иране. У нас не остается никаких сомнений, что афганский наркотрафик представляет собой угрозу международному миру и стабильности, что прямо зафиксировано в резолюциях Совета Безопасности 1943 и 1974. Нейтрализовать эту угрозу необходимо коллективными усилиями, используя все имеющиеся возможности. Но, к сожалению, коалиционные силы не придают этому должного внимания. На наш взгляд, иностранное военное присутствие в Афганистане совместно с афганской армией и полицией могут и должны предпринять более активные усилия в борьбе с наркопроизводством в этой стране, тем более, что они взяли на себя ответственность за вопросы безопасности в стране. В силе остается наше предложение наладить взаимодействие на этом треке в режиме реального времени с партнерами из стран НАТО, как по линии Шанхайской организации сотрудничества, так и по линии ОДКБ. Мы глубоко обеспокоены гибелью мирных жителей в результате неизбирательного или непропорционального использования силы участниками боевых действий. Ответственность за обеспечение безопасности гражданского населения и строгое соблюдение норм международного гуманитарного права несут все стороны, включая многонациональные силы. Мы продолжаем выступать за укрепление центральных координирующих функций ООН в международных гражданских усилиях по афганскому регулированию, эффективное и беспристрастное содействие со стороны ООН в деле реализации положений итогового документа Габульской конференции об афганизации управления страной является залогом долгосрочной стабилизации в Афганистане. И другой важный момент – это контроль со стороны ООН за тем, как международные силы содействия безопасности выполняют мандат Совета Безопасности. Они находятся на афганской территории с санкцией Совета, а значит могут быть выведены только по решению Совета, отчитавшись перед ним за выполнение поставленных задач. И они не вправе покинуть Афганистан, не подавив террористическую активность, не создав эффективную армию и полицию. Мы исходим из того, что объявленное президентом США Бараком Обамой снижение численности американских войск будет компенсировано усилиями по повышению боеспособности афганских вооруженных сил, которые должны быть в состоянии самостоятельно контролировать безопасность и эффективно противодействовать экстремистам и наркопреступности. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
سيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أشكر الممثل الشخصي للأمين العام السيد ستيفان دي مستورا والمندوب الدائم لأفغانستان على إحاطتيهما. كما أثمن الجهود التي تبذلها بعثة الأمم المتحدة لتقديم المساعدة إلى أفغانستان أناما رئيساً وأفراداً في ظروف أمنية صعبة. ها نحن اليوم وبعد مرور حوالي 10 سنوات على بدء الأعمال العسكرية الدولية في أفغانستان نشهد بداية مرحلة نقل المسؤوليات الأمنية إلى السلطات الأفغانية، إلا أن الوضع الأمني لا يزال مقلقاً للغاية، والعمليات العنيفة ضد القوات الدولية والقوات الأفغانية والشعب الأفغاني مستمرة وبوتيرة متصاعدة، مما يستدعي استكمال تعزيز قدرات القوات الأفغانية خلال المرحلة الانتقالية تمهيداً لتسلمها زمام القيادة. ومن منطلق حرصنا على حماية المدنيين وممتلكاتهم، نجدد مناشدة كافة الأطراف الالتزام الكامل بالقانون الدولي الإنساني وبذل أقصى الجهود لتحييد الأبرياء عن العنف. وفي إطار المساعي الهادفة إلى التوصل لحل سياسي للأزمة، نشيد بالإجراءات المتخذة لتحقيق المصالحة والاندماج، لا سيما منها الدور المحوري الذي يقوم به المجلس الأعلى للسلام. ومن المحق التنويه بالدعم الذي عبر عنه هذا المجلس لعملية المصالحة من خلال اعتماد القرار 1988 بالإجماع، والذي قضى بفصل نظام العقوبات على طالبان عن نظام العقوبات على القاعدة، تشجيعاً منه لكل من ينبذ العنف ويفك ارتباطه بالتنظيمات الإرهابية ويؤكد احترامه للدستور على الانخراط في العملية السلمية. وفي مسألة لا تقل أهمية عن الوضع الأمني، نطالب بالمضي قدماً في تحسين وضع حقوق الإنسان في أفغانستان، لا سيما مواصلة الجهود لتنفيذ القانون المتعلق بالقضاء على العنف ضد المرأة وفي كافة المقاطعات، فحمايتها من الظلم والإكراه والتمييز وإشراكها في الحياة العامة هو من المطالب التي تنادي بها منظمتنا باستمرار. بالإضافة إلى ذلك، ندعو إلى إيلاء الاهتمام الواجب للمزاعم الواردة في تقرير الأمين العام حول سوء معاملة الموقوفين وعدم تأمين حقوق الدفاع لهم والاحتجازات التعسفية دون تهم أو محاكمات، فهذه الشوائب تعيق حكم القانون وبناء المؤسسات وفقاً لمعايير الحكم الصالح. بموازاة ذلك، نؤكد على أهمية استمرار تطبيق التزامات عملية كابول، وخاصة لجهة الإنماء الاجتماعي والاقتصادي وإصلاح الإدارة العامة